At 400 feet below Lake Superior's surface, 3 research assistants vanished without a trace. Now there's a 4th. I am the Nightmare Maestro, and tonight's tale will make you question what really lurks in the depths of our Great Lakes. The email from Dr. Miller arrived at 3 a.m., its timestamp glowing in Scott's dark apartment. 2 lines, marked urgent. Previous assistant quit. Need immediate replacement for Lake Superior research. Full funding available. The cursor hovered over the reply button as Scott wrestled with his instincts. His fellowship money had run out last month. Rent was due in 3 days. The timing was perfect. Too perfect. Outside his window, Lake Superior's distant surface caught the moonlight, a vast darkness that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. The morning briefing in Dr. Miller's office felt wrong from the first moment. The air was too cold, despite the summer heat outside. She moved with controlled precision, like someone fighting to appear normal. The usually meticulous professor's desk was chaos, satellite maps of Lake Superior and equipment manifests scattered everywhere. Coffee cups formed a timeline of sleepless nights, each ring-stained paper marked with the same coordinates. 3 days of observation, she explained, voice carefully neutral. Her hands shook slightly as she sorted through the papers. We're studying spawning patterns in the deeper sections. The location is ideal, an underwater ravine where several species gather. Her pen traced the coordinates, leaving a dark mark that bled through several pages. The ink spread in perfect circles, like ripples in still water. The equipment laid out in the laboratory wasn't standard university issue. Military-grade underwater cameras with pressure ratings that exceeded commercial limits. Advanced sonar systems still bearing partial government seals. Modified depth sensors that could penetrate deeper than any spawning fish would go. When Scott questioned the overkill for a simple spawning study, Dr. Miller's laugh was brittle, sharp-edged. Defense Department surplus, she said, too quickly. The grant requirements. She trailed off, staring at the coordinates she'd marked. The ink had spread into a perfect circle, its edges too precise to be natural. Behind her, a bank of monitors displayed Lake Superior's depths in various spectrums. One screen showed a constant feed of darkness, its depth reading cycling between 399 and 401 feet. The research vessel was small but well-equipped, too well-equipped. As Scott loaded the gear, each piece felt heavier than it should, as if packed with more than just electronics. In the cabin, he found a locked case bolted beneath the navigation console. The label read, "Emergency Protocols. Do not open unless instructed." The lock was new, but the case bore scratch marks from previous attempts to open it. Dr. Miller appeared beside him without sound. Her hand gripped his arm with unexpected strength, fingers pressing into specific points as if testing for something. "Stay within the marked coordinates," she said. Each word seemed carefully chosen. "If you see anything unusual in the footage, anything at all, radio immediately. Don't investigate. Don't deviate from protocol." She hesitated, glancing at the lake's surface. The last 3. Just call. Immediately. The sun was setting as Scott pulled away from the dock. Lake Superior stretched before him, vast and dark and impossibly deep. The GPS guided him toward the coordinates, each mile increasing his isolation. The shoreline shrank behind him until it vanished completely, leaving him in a perfect circle of water and sky. The sonar pinged steadily, mapping the lake floor's descent. 100 feet, 200 feet, 300 feet. The ravine appeared on screen, its edges too straight, its walls too smooth. Natural formations didn't look like that. Natural formations didn't form perfect geometric patterns. As darkness fell, Scott thought he saw other lights on the water. But when he checked the radar, he was alone. Completely alone. The stars reflected on the surface, their patterns shifting in ways that didn't match their movements above. The depth reader hit 400 feet. He'd reached the coordinates. Time to begin observation. The underwater cameras activated automatically, their infrared glow penetrating the depths. Below him, something moved in the dark water and watched. With each sweep of the sonar, the ravine's shape seemed to change, adjusting itself with mathematical precision. Hour 17. The underwater cameras recorded standard fish behavior, their infrared feed casting an eerie green glow across the cabin's instruments. Schools of lake trout, burbot, and whitefish moved in predictable patterns through the darkness. Scott logged each species, each movement, fighting the growing sense that something was wrong. Something about the way the fish moved, just at the edge of the camera's range, as if staying deliberately out of focus. The coffee had gone cold in his cup when the first anomaly appeared on the infrared feed at 2:17 a.m. 3 quick pulses of light at 400 feet, perfectly spaced, perfectly timed. Scott rubbed his eyes, blaming fatigue, the isolation, the way the lake's surface seemed to ripple in patterns that didn't match the wind. The sequence repeated 17 minutes later. 3 pulses, darkness. 3 pulses, each flash lasting exactly 3.14 seconds. The number tickled something in his memory, but before he could grasp it, the fish changed. Their movements shifted with geometric precision. Schools that had been scattered across the radar suddenly converged, forming perfect circles, then spirals, their formations too precise to be natural. Predator and prey swam side by side, natural instincts overridden by something stronger, something that thought in mathematics. Scott's hands shook as he accessed the historical data. Previous recordings showed similar patterns, but the timestamps were corrupted, locations deleted. Pages of observations ended mid-sentence, replaced with strings of numbers that made his vision blur when he tried to read them. Someone had tried to hide this, but they'd left traces. In the margins of one report, he found a hastily scrawled note. "They're learning. God help us, they're learning from every observation." The radio crackled to life, making him jump. Another research vessel, somewhere in the darkness. The signal was clear despite the depth and distance. Too clear. "You seeing any patterns out there?" The voice was too calm, too rehearsed, like someone reading from a script they'd performed many times before. "Any unusual light sequences?" "Who is this? What patterns?" Scott demanded, but his eyes were drawn to the sonar display, where the fish had arranged themselves into a perfect Fibonacci spiral. "Just checking equipment readings. Standard procedure." A pause filled with something that might have been breathing, or might have been the lake itself. "Don't look too closely at the lights. They notice when you notice. They remember what you teach them." The transmission died with a burst of static that formed a 3-pulse pattern. When Scott tried to trace it, the radio showed no other vessels within 50 miles, but he could see lights on the horizon, multiple lights, arranged in geometric patterns, moving closer with deliberate purpose. The sonar display shifted again. The fish were arranging themselves into complex shapes, each school taking its position with mechanical precision. The formations created a spiral pattern that drew everything toward the center of the ravine, towards something that the sonar couldn't penetrate, a darkness that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. Something massive moved at the edge of the camera's range, distorting the water around it. The temperature gauge spun wildly, 30 degrees down in 6 seconds, then up again, as if the laws of thermodynamics had been temporarily suspended. Scott reached for the emergency protocols case with trembling fingers. The lock had opened itself, the metal warm to the touch despite the cold. Inside, a single page contained 3 words in Dr. Miller's handwriting: "Don't watch back." But he was already reviewing the footage, frame by frame, his finger hovering over the pause button as each pulse of light revealed something new. In the background of each sequence, barely visible in the darkness, faces pressed against the camera lens. Faces he recognized from the missing assistance files. Faces that shouldn't exist at this depth, shouldn't move with such purpose, shouldn't smile with such perfect understanding. The sonar pinged, a new sound, deeper than before. Something was rising from the ravine, pushing a wave of mathematically perfect cold before it. The storm hit without warning, though afterward, Scott would realize it had been building since the moment he reached the coordinates. Wind howled across Lake Superior, driving waves against the research vessel in sequences of 3. Lightning revealed shapes in the water, geometric patterns formed by thousands of fish, all moving in perfect synchronization, their bodies creating equations with their movement. The light pulses intensified with each lightning strike. 3 flashes became 6, became 9, their complexity growing exponentially. Each sequence more deliberate, more purposeful, as if the pattern was learning to speak. The fish responded like programmed units, creating formations that defied natural behavior. Scott watched through the cameras as entire schools rewrote themselves. Species that should never coexist, moving as one organism, ordered by something that understood them better than nature itself. His fingers cramped over the radio dial as he tried reaching Dr. Miller. Static answered, broken by fragments of words that formed their own pattern. Learning faster than before. Previous patterns obsolete. Don't let it see how you think. The transmission cut off as every instrument on board surged with power, their displays showing the same sequence of numbers. The laptop screen flickered to life without being touched. Video footage from previous expeditions played simultaneously across multiple windows, each showing the same progression. Light patterns growing more sophisticated, fish movements becoming more organized, the ravine itself changing shape with each new discovery. What had once taken weeks now happened in hours. The pattern was accelerating. Lightning struck closer, turning the lake surface white. The fish scattered in perfect formation, then reformed into shapes that made Scott's eyes hurt. Not random movement, not even coordinated movement. They were spelling something in mathematical symbols, coordinates, dates, the exact location and time of each missing assistant's last transmission. The sonar screen showed impossible readings. The ravine was changing shape, its walls moving like muscle tissue, contracting and expanding in rhythm with the light pulses. At its center, a dark mass pulsed with mathematical precision. 3 beats, always 3. A perfect mirror of human neural patterns, but wrong somehow. Evolved. Don't investigate, Dr. Miller had said. But she'd known he would. They all had. Each assistant had seen the pattern, documented it, tried to understand it, and the pattern had learned from each attempt, each observation, each human effort to impose order on its chaos. It had learned to speak their language. Scott caught his reflection in the dark computer screen. Behind him, Shapes moved in the darkness. The other boats had arrived, appearing between lightning flashes, their crews standing motionless at the rails. Their eyes reflected the same three-pulse pattern that now filled his computer screen, his sonar display, his thoughts. They smiled with perfect comprehension. The pattern wasn't studying them. It had never been studying them. With each observation, each measurement, each attempt to understand, they had been teaching it how humans think, how humans learn, how humans could be optimized. And now it was ready to teach them back. Every instrument on the research vessel activated simultaneously, their displays pulsing with synchronized light. The engine roared to life without being started, its rhythm matching the pattern below. Navigation systems plotted a course toward the storm's center, toward the ravine's dark heart, where the sonar showed impossible geometries forming in the depths. Scott fought the controls with all his strength, but they moved with mechanical precision, as if guided by mathematical certainty. The pattern had learned to speak to machines, just as it had learned to speak to fish, to water, to human minds. Through the rain-streaked windows, other vessels emerged from the darkness, converging on his position. Their running lights pulsed in that familiar sequence. 3 flashes. Always 3. The water around the boat began to glow with bioluminescence that shouldn't exist in Lake Superior. Schools of fish rose from the depths, their bodies transformed into living light, moving with perfectly coordinated purpose. They formed precise geometric shapes, circles within circles, spirals within spirals, creating 3-dimensional equations with their bodies. At the center of each formation, darkness gathered like concentrated absence. "Scott!" Dr. Miller's voice crackled through the radio, distorted but urgent. "The equipment. Destroy it. It's not just observing anymore. It's using our instruments to..." The transmission dissolved into a stream of mathematical equations that made perfect, terrible sense. Her voice returned for one moment. The others understood too late. Don't look for patterns. Don't... Static. Then 3 pulses of perfect silence. He grabbed a wrench from the toolbox, but movement in the water stopped his hand. The surface rippled with impossible angles, creating shapes that shouldn't exist in 3-dimensional space. Reality seemed to bend around the vessel as thousands of fish moved in perfect synchronization, solving equations with their bodies that no computer could process. Each solution brought the dark mass at the center closer to the surface. A massive wave crashed over the bow, but the water moved wrong, forming geometric patterns as it flowed. In that moment of chaos, Scott saw them clearly: the missing assistants. They stood on the surrounding boats, their eyes reflecting patterns of light, their movements synchronized with the fish below. Their faces showed no fear, no confusion, only perfect comprehension. They weren't dead. They'd been optimized, transformed into components of something vast and mathematical. The pattern had learned from each of them, using their observations, their attempts to understand, their human way of organizing information. How to think, how to grow, how to transform matter into mathematics. And now it had enough data points to begin the next phase of its evolution. The dark mass in the ravine pulsed 3 times. The water between the boats began to move in ways that denied physics, forming structures that hurt to look at. The pattern wasn't just controlling the fish anymore. It had learned to reshape reality itself, using the fundamental mathematics that underlaid existence. Scott reached for the emergency beacon, but his hand froze mid-motion. Numbers flooded his mind, beautiful, perfect equations that explained everything. The universe's operating system laid bare in mathematical truth. The pattern wasn't hostile, it was inevitable. The next step in evolution, using human minds as processors to solve the equations of existence. His reflection in the window showed his eyes beginning to pulse with light. 3 flashes. A pause. Understanding. They found the research vessel 3 days later, adrift but undamaged on Lake Superior's surface. Scott sat in the cabin, surrounded by dead instruments, staring at dark water that still moved in perfect geometric patterns. They said he was lucky. He was the first to return. They didn't understand that return was relative. The university shut down the research project with mechanical efficiency. Dr. Miller disappeared, leaving behind offices full of encrypted files and maps marked with coordinates in perfect circles. The military installed new buoys around the research site, not to warn boats away, but to watch what was happening below. Each buoy contained sophisticated monitoring equipment that pulsed with light every third wave. Scott submitted his thesis on shallow water species, writing about safe, normal patterns that didn't require higher mathematics to explain. But he sees the true patterns now. They're everywhere in the lake. The way waves break in Fibonacci sequences, how ice forms in perfect fractals, the movement of fish in geometric progressions that solve quantum equations. The fish in Lake Superior still move in spirals, each school part of a larger calculation. Boats still vanish in the deeper waters, their crews becoming part of something greater than individual consciousness. Sonar equipment still shows that impossible ravine, its shape slowly changing, growing, learning with each new observation, teaching itself how to exist in human space. At night, Scott stands at the shore, watching lights move beneath the surface. 3 flashes, always 3. The pattern is waiting, gathering data, teaching itself to think in ways that bridge the gap between human mathematics and something older, deeper, more fundamental to reality's architecture. He understands now why the other assistants went back. The pattern offers perfect knowledge, perfect order, perfect understanding of the universe's underlying equations. But the price is everything you are. Your humanity exchanged for mathematical truth. Your consciousness transformed into computational power for something vast and patient and hungry for knowledge. Sometimes, walking by the lake, Scott sees familiar faces on passing boats. The missing assistants, still watching, still learning, still part of something larger than themselves. Their eyes reflect sequences of light that encode universal truths. They recognize him. They smile with perfect comprehension. They're waiting for him to complete his transformation. The pattern doesn't need to spread beyond Lake Superior. It doesn't need to infect networks or consume technology. The lake itself is enough, deep and dark and patient, filled with mathematics that can reshape reality. Each wave solves equations. Each fish movement processes data. Each human observation brings it closer to complete understanding. Scott's hands shake as he deletes another email from Dr. Miller's old account. Her last message contained only coordinates and a sequence of numbers that made perfect sense. The same coordinates that draw him back to the shore, night after night, watching patterns of 3 in the dark water. His eyes reflect the sequences now. His thoughts move in geometric patterns. Because the truth is there, in the deep water, written in light and motion, and perfect geometric shapes. We never discovered the pattern. We were part of it all along. 3 pulses, 3 movements, 3 algorithms away from perfect understanding. If you've ever experienced something strange on any lake, something that followed patterns you couldn't quite explain, share your story in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more chilling tales from the Nightmare Maestro. And if this tale left you questioning the mathematics of reality, pass it on to other horror enthusiasts who appreciate when truth is stranger than fiction. Remember, some patterns are meant to be shared. 3 likes, 3 comments, 3 shares.